So I want to talk about my experience wearing traditionally women's Casio watches as a guy with a small wrist. And just to get that out of the way, I have a 6.25 inch wrist, or 2 inches from here to here. And before diving into this topic, just for the sake of semantics, I'm just going to refer to women's watches as watches that have been traditionally marketed toward women, and men's watches as watches that are traditionally marketed towards men. And I think there are a vast array of what I guess you call unisex watches that Casio has. But for the most part, Casio does a good job of at least self-categorizing its watches into men's watches and women's watches. Now, of course, having a collection of what you call women's Casio watches, I think it's absolutely fine. But I did want to sort of talk about it and explore this topic in case there are other people out there, particularly guys, who are like worried or nervous that, oh no, I'm wearing a women's watch. What do people think of me? For the most part, nobody really even cares what kind of watch you're wearing. It's mostly for yourself. Now, the reason why I've sort of looked more so at the women's watches that Casio has is because a lot of the men's watches just don't fit me. I mean, you look at G-Shock, for example, that lineup, for the most part, is way too big for my wrist. And the thing is, even some of the smaller G-Shocks tend to feel a little bit too big. And the thing is, I see the pictures online of these pretty big and thick G-Shocks on small, skinny wrists. And it's a lot of guys asking if the watch is too big, and they ask everyone, and everyone sort of chimes in. And if you look at some of the Reddit posts and forums, traditionally I think people are encouraging, like, oh no, it's supposed to be big. Don't worry about it. It looks great. Very rarely do I see where people sort of pile on, especially in the G-Shock or Casio subreddits, that, oh yeah, the watch is way too big. I mean, we don't want to make people feel too bad. But here's my thing when it comes to our watches too big for me. If I have to ask, then it's already too big. All right, that's just the rule that I have. If I have to ask, it's too big. For any of these watches that are traditionally women's watches, G-Shock or otherwise, I've never had to ask, is this watch too big? I just wore it and I'm like, okay, yeah, that seems to fit my small wrist, looks good, and I move on. And as I've grown as a Casio watch collector, I've stopped really caring about which Casios are for women and which ones are for men. Of course, notwithstanding the baby G lineup. I wish they would change that. But anyway, frankly, the ideal watch size for me that I found for my wrist size is between 38 and 40 millimeters. I think I might be able to push a 42 millimeter, but for the most part, I'm very comfortable wearing something around 38 to 40. And of course, some of these watches are smaller than that, and that's okay. But anything more than like 41, I'm like, I'm probably not even gonna look at that. And so I've come to realize that when it comes to watches, I'm just looking at design and size. I don't really care as much about whether it's categorized as a women's or a men's watch. And it's too bad, because there are some nice women's watches that I think are really great. And I think if they just didn't label them as a woman's watch, more people would be open to buying them, and maybe they would expand that size. Not the women's line, but just the size of the watch. And I think that's important. That's sort of what's missing, I think, with Casio these days. I mean, just looking at my own collection right here, for the G-Shocks, I picked the metal G-Shocks that I thought would fit my wrist. And these are two of them that are women's G-Shocks. And they're metal, and I think they're nice. Of course, this one has the negative display, which shouldn't have gotten a negative display one, but it was metal and I like this shape. And of course, this one positive display and sort of rugged and very angular on the design. But they have men's versions of these. I just don't want to wear them because they're too big. These are thinner, these are lighter, and of course, diameter wise, they're just the perfect size for my wrist. And I have to say that there are actually a lot of advantages to being open to women's watches as a guy. And for me, I've seen that a lot of them actually are readily available. People are clamoring usually for, the men G-Shock, right? The newest releases. And granted, they don't have as many women's G-Shock releases, but when they do, they don't really sell out all that much. And so if you are just looking at the size of the watch and you don't care so much about, what it's marketed towards in terms of the audience, then you could pick up a nice size watch that no one's really looking for. And the thing is, I feel like the features are somewhat equivalent. Not all the time, but they're pretty much equivalent. Like I look at this one, this is like your traditional G-Shock square. It still has the same 200 meters. It's just a little bit smaller. And I think the most important thing that I've learned when it comes to collecting Casios is the fit. That's the most important thing. At the end of the day, I don't really care so much about like the design. I mean, of course I love the design. That's important. I want it to look nice on my wrist. I want it to have good features. I want to be able to read it. But the thing is, if it doesn't fit well on my wrist, I'm not gonna want to wear it. And I think that's where watches like this come into play, where the fit is just nicer than the traditional 2100. But I will say though that there are some downsides if you're traditionally looking at a women's watch selection. There just aren't a lot of choices, and especially when it comes to color, it becomes kind of tough. Like I wish they would make this watch, exact same watch, make it in black with a positive display. They have this style of watch, but it's a black one with a negative display. There's very few of this particular, I think it's an S2100. There's very few of them that have a positive display. And if they would just include more positive displays, then I think a lot more people would be open to this size. Because at around, I think it's 38 millimeters from 12 to 6, and this way too. It's pretty good. It fits a small wrist very well compared to the men's one. But going back to the colors, when you're looking at a lot of the women's watches that Casio offers, a lot of them are pink or white and very shiny. And that's sort of why I settled on this. And frankly, I don't know why they think all women want those particular colors. Some of them, you know, they have like a green, a blue, you know, like a baby blue. Like those are very nice, maybe like a matted finish, but they should also, I think, consider just having more like neutral colors, like black or gray, you know, or like a navy blue. Like those colors are also okay, and I think that there are women who would like to wear those colors as well. Not everyone, I think, wants to wear a bright pink watch. Another issue that I found is that there aren't women's equivalent watches in certain Casio lines. So the ones that I come to think of are Pro Trek and the G-Shock Move collection. You know, I have the PRG 30, and it's a good watch. It's one of the smaller ones, good digital display, and it's on its smaller side. But when I look at like the marketing material, I see like the women hikers, they're wearing that watch. I'm like, okay, I guess maybe it'll fit, but they're not wearing any of the bigger watches. So I wish they would take some of those bigger watches and just kind of like shrink them down just a little bit. And of course with the G-Shock Move, I've been looking at that MIP display. Oh my goodness, it looks so good, but the watch is just too big. I tried, I think it was the, I'm gonna mess it up. I think it was the 6500, 5600. G-Shock Move as well as the 200, and it's just a little bit too big. I mean, it's nice that it has a MIP display, has sensor on it, all of that. It's great for fitness, and I would love to wear that, but it just, to me, it seems too big, and I don't want to spend that much money on a fitness watch if it's too big, especially when, you know, you're looking at other alternatives like Garmin and other brands. I wish I could stay with Casio on that, because I loved having my Garmin before. Great display, and it fit my wrist. It wasn't too huge. But with Casio, because I mean, I love collecting Casio, I love the brand, but they just don't have anything in that smaller size, whether it's men or women. So I hope that in the future they come up with something smaller. And last but not least, of course, is the Frogman. This is the closest that they got. I wish they would have a smaller Frogman. I mean, this is a Baby G Frogman. I think it's perfect for my wrist size. The dimensions are kind of weird because of how it's encased in this resin, but this watch is great. It's one of my favorites. Has a little shark display. I mean, how fun is that, you know? Yeah. And I just wish they would consider like the smaller ones. And actually, I did go to the store and I tried on the normal men's Frogman, and you know what? Yeah, it didn't look as big as I thought. It's not like something like the Mudman and some of those huge ones, but still, it's too big for my wrist, and I wouldn't want to wear it. And I think as I'm moving forward in my collection of Casios, I'll be primarily looking at women's watches, and I'm sometimes baffled that these are only marketed toward women, like the A1000 series. It's a great looking watch. It's a digital watch. It has, you know, steel, nice bracelet, nice interesting colors too, but it's pretty much ignored by most men because it's not marketed towards towards them. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, they want the A168 or, you know, one of those like digital Casio watches, but they don't want it in resin. They want it in metal. They want steel. And it's like, well, they make that. It's just sort of a women's watch. And so I think if they maybe change that narrative, then I think more people would be open to buying some of these watches and go more based on size and not necessarily towards gender. And when it comes to whether you're comfortable wearing women's watches as a guy, I think you're just gonna have to ask yourself and decide if you're okay with that. And for me, I'm okay with that. Some people might not be okay with that. Like, it'd be hard for me to wear a baby G. I know it doesn't make sense, but it would be hard for me to wear baby Gs. And this is the reason why I only have one of these. There's a lot of nice size watches with baby G, but I just don't want to see baby G. And that's just a personal preference. But when it comes to other women's watches, particularly some of the G-Shocks, I have no problem wearing these. And I hope that Casio would maybe just kind of lighten up a little bit on the men's versus the women's watches and just continue to create interesting and new innovative designs and sizes that are diverse so that we can all enjoy these watches. So thanks for watching.